Okay, well, as you may have seen in the news, the Pope has just been on a visit to Britain. So the high point of his visit was that he was beatifying John Henry Newman, a major 19th century English thinker.
So he is now the Blessed John Henry Newman.
So beatification means that henceforth Newman will be called the Blessed John Henry Newman. So he's not quite a saint yet.
Yes, you have to have a miracle attributed to your intercession. So a Roman Catholic deacon in North America prayed to Cardinal Newman, said to Cardinal Newman, please pray for me that I might be cured of, I think it's a spinal disorder, and he was cured.
It's a relatively easy miracle to have. I don't think the main thing about Newman is that miracles might now be attributed to him. But this happens to be the process in the Catholic Church that you can't become a saint. Well, you can't become the blessed one. You can't be beatified without one miracle, and then you need another one to become a saint. But I don't think that for anybody that's really the focus of attention.
Is it a big deal? The current Pope, Benedict XVI, has beatified very few people. His predecessor beatified over 1,300 people. And it all got a little bit out of hand, the Vatican thinks.
John Henry Newman was a 19th century figure, spanned almost the whole of the 19th century, born in 1801, lived till 1890.
He had two conversions in his life. One of them was to become an evangelical Anglican Christian. He went as a student to Oxford. He didn't do very well as a student because he had a breakdown when he took his final examinations. But his intelligence in the end shone through. He was elected as a Fellow of Oriel College in Oxford.
He started off as an Anglican, and in midlife he converted to Roman Catholicism, which was quite a major step in those days. And he lost a lot of his friends, broke off relations with some of his family.
Gradually over his life, he came under the influence of other Oxford clergy who wanted to really emphasise the Catholic identity of the Church of England and its consistency with the early Christians. So what they did is they looked at the Church of England and said, well, we look like we're part of the Reformation, this great split in the Church in the 16th century. But let's see if we can trace our identity and our authority right back to the first 500-600 years of the Church.
But he was a very powerful intellect and wrote a lot of fascinating works and was really a pathbreaker in a number of different areas.
And so Newman was part of a movement that became known as the Oxford movement or the Tractarian movement in the 1830s.
One of John Henry Newman's major contributions was in the area of the development of doctrine, or the development of dogma, which is about the idea that a tradition is not something which stays the same, but something which develops. So he was a person who was grappling with the importance of history for Christianity, of change, of the fact that change didn't have to mean illegitimacy or falsification.
The difficulty for Newman was that his study of Anglicanism in the end led him to doubt whether it really had a firm historical link back to the early Catholic Church. And his doubts in the early 1840s led him to resign as vicar of the University Church, St Mary's in Oxford, to retreat to a little community in Littlemore outside Oxford. And in the end, this led to his conversion to Roman Catholicism in 1845. And the reason why Newman is revered is because that conversion, the second conversion of his life, first to Christianity, then to Roman Catholicism, cost him dearly.
Before Newman, the standard line had been the tradition was that which was believed everywhere, always, and by everyone. So it was a very static conception of the tradition. And this was no longer really possible in light of the historical knowledge people had in the 19th century. And Newman was one of the first to grapple with that question.
It broke his relationships. Members of his family never talked to him again. So he paid dearly for holding to his conscience and for holding to his principles.
I mean, Newman was also a very devout Christian. He was first an Anglican priest and then he became a Catholic priest. He was very serious pastorally and he has been credited with a miracle recently. But really, I think Newman's major contribution was an intellectual one.
He became a great teacher, a great educator. He became the rector of the newly founded University College Dublin. He wrote a great book that its influence still lasts today on the idea of the modern university, or the idea of the university.
It's probably quite a big deal to the Pope. The Pope doesn't have to, usually it's not the Pope who does beatifications, but Newman was quite important to the Pope, who's also a theologian, to the Pope's own intellectual development. It's interesting because, whatever you say about the miracles and whatever you say about Newman's piety, what he's really known for is his intellectual contribution. So this is singling out a Christian intellectual who made an unusual contribution and saying this too is worthy of recognition by the Church.
The Church of England's feeling towards Cardinal Newman is a little bit ambiguous. So on the one hand, he really developed and matured as a priest and a theologian within the fold of the Church of England. That's what nurtured him. He also, I think, deeply influenced the Church of England and its practice in the following sense, that there are certain things that Christians do that were really recovered in the Church of England under Newman's influence. I mean, one of them is the communion service, or the Eucharist, or what some Anglicans and Roman Catholics call the Mass.
But one thing that's really fascinating about Newman was just how much he agonized over the question of which church he should belong to. I mean, he spent literally years worrying about this. There's probably never been anyone who's been so conscientious about the question of which is the true church and where should I belong. And I remember when I studied him when I was 21, I got very worried that myself and all my colleagues were somehow very shallow, because you never found us worrying to this degree about whether we were in exactly the right church. We figured it wasn't such a question that grabbed us so forcefully, but Newman really spent years agonizing over this and shaped his whole life around it.